Thank you, Virginia, for that very, very warm introduction. Can I acknowledge your President, Joe Qatar, who has been in the role for 12 years. What an outstanding achievement, and congratulations for everything he's done. Can I acknowledge Consul General Ghanem? Can I acknowledge Virginia Judge, the former Member of Parliament for Strathfield, who's the MC today? But can I also acknowledge my very good friend and the member for Parramatta, who I know has very strong links to the Australian Lebanese community, Jeff Lee, and appreciate everything he does as well. And can I thank so many of you in the room who I regard as friends. Anwar Harb was one of the first people I ever met in the Australian Lebanese community, very proudly, and there's so many of you in this room in that category. And my first message to all of you as this state's Treasurer is thank you for the contribution the Chamber makes, that you personally make to the New South Wales economy. And I see in this room people who have strong work ethic, strong values, and a really strong zest to do better for our state and our country. And for that, as a representative of the state government, I am eternally grateful. So thank you to all of you for all the contribution you make. And as your President, Joe Qatar, mentioned so generously, I am very proudly of Armenian descent. And as some of you may know, I have relatives in Lebanon. To this day, many of my cousins live in Lebanon, and for Armenians, Burj is like a second home to us in Beirut. Who here has been to Burj? Yeah, excellent. And so when I'm in Lebanon, did I stir a few conversations on the tables? When I'm in Lebanon, I feel very close to home, and I think today what is very symbolic for me is the effort that your President, Mr Qatar, and the Chamber Executive have taken to broaden the representation of women in the Chamber, and that is such a noble thing for the Chamber to do, and I congratulate you. And I say this because I am lucky, because I've grown up in a family where Lebanon is always somewhere we feel safe and comfortable, and I think people underestimate what a modern country Lebanon is. The values that you bring here, very diverse but also extremely tolerant. I know that your grandparents' generation was very kind to the Armenian people when many moved to Lebanon to call Lebanon home, and that is a message that I will always proudly convey at the roots of the Lebanese community, because I think those values of tolerance, diversity and hard work you've brought to this country and made our country better. And I'm very proud to call you my friends, and very proud to serve in a state which is so well represented by people of Lebanese background. Shukran, shukran. My Arabic needs work. When we were young, my parents used to speak Arabic when they didn't want us to understand something, so I picked up a few words along the way. But today I'm here more formally as a State's Treasurer to acknowledge the wonderful work the Chamber does, but also to give you some insights as to how the New South Wales economy is going, and hopefully from your own personal experience in your businesses and from those you associate with, you will feel the buzz that we certainly feel in New South Wales. And when we came to government, we inherited what you would describe as a business close to administration. Things were an absolute mess, and in 5 years' time, or in 5 years, we've managed to turn that around, and we've gone from being the worst state in the nation in terms of economic performance and budget position to having the strongest economic position and the strongest budget position, and that's something we're very proud of as a state government. And I feel very proud that every month when the unemployment figures come out, New South Wales is creating more than half the jobs in the entire country. So when you add up the jobs that all the other states create, New South Wales is creating more jobs, and that is something we're very proud of, because more jobs means economic growth, means people can achieve all their aspirations they want to achieve in life. And how did we manage in 5 years to turn this situation around? As many of you would know from your own business experience, you make sure that you live within your means. As a government, we came in and we made some difficult decisions, and we stand by those decisions. We're very proud of those decisions. So, for example, a basic principle that you make sure your expenses don't grow more than your revenue growth. Basic principle of business we've applied to government. You also make sure that you provide a very certain business operating environment. In the past, a number of projects were announced and didn't continue. A number of policy announcements were made which didn't happen. When we came to government, we committed to making sure we did everything we said we would. And I believe that's provided a very certain business operating environment. When you hear Government of New South Wales, when you hear our Premier Mike Baird or any of our ministers make an announcement about a policy decision or a new project, you can have confidence that will happen. And because of our very strong infrastructure pipeline, because of the very strong economic conditions, we now see our community growing in a way we haven't seen for decades and decades. And one of the strong indicators we have month on month is that we have 40-year high approvals for housing in New South Wales. And we know the best thing we can do to put downward pressure on housing for new entrants is to increase supply. And it's so important for us as a government to make sure we keep the infrastructure going, keep the jobs growth to ensure our community grows along with it. So in addition to having a very certain operating environment, we also appreciate that reducing red tape for business, providing incentive for business to hire people, are some of the things you need to do to get the economy not just moving but gaining and increasing momentum. So today, coming from a place where we were last in the nation, we do now have the strongest economy, and only this morning ANZ put out their last, what they call Stateometer, which shows New South Wales again is leading the nation on most major indicators, and that's something we're incredibly proud of. But for us, it's not just about today. When you're in a business or in government, you can't be satisfied with doing or standing still. What can we do today to improve the quality of life and opportunity for all of our citizens in the future? Because something I strongly believe in, which I believe is partly a reflection of my background, is no matter where you're born, no matter what your background, every person in this state should have the ability to reach their potential, to be the best they can be. Having a good education system, a good health system, so that no matter where you are from, you are able to work hard and reach all your aspirations. And I think that is something all of us in this room can relate to. And as a government, we don't do reform or put our economic credentials as the best in the nation without the fact that what underpins this is our inherent belief that we want to make sure that every person in this state has a better quality of life and reaches all of their aspirations. So for us, it's not just about today, it's about the future. And I'm very pleased to be part of a government that has a 5 and 20-year infrastructure strategy in place. So the momentum you're feeling now isn't just going to last 2 or 3 years. We want you to invest in our state for the medium and the long term. This is the place where people will want to live, work, and we're even seeing now our net migration levels are the highest they've been since the 1970s, because as the mining sector comes off in WA and Queensland, we're seeing a lot more people move here to New South Wales. We know we've got the external operating environment which is in our favour, but I believe we also have a strong government who appreciates all the opportunities that flow on from that. And I hope we've demonstrated also as a government that not only when you look at our credentials of all the statistics as to how strong our economy is, but also the way we do things, being open, transparent and dealing with people honestly is, I think, so important in business and also in government. It's about having a conversation and bringing people with you. And one of the most difficult decisions we made at the time was at the last election when we said we would recycle our assets in relation to electricity, the poles and wires businesses, and we would invest $20 billion into infrastructure. Now, I can confirm that in the next 3 and a bit years, 4 years, we are spending $68 billion in infrastructure, plus over the next 10 years, an extra $20 billion. And that will set up our state for the next generation and beyond. So in these brief comments, I wanted to thank you all for having me here today. I want to thank you for the contribution you make to New South Wales, and I would be really pleased to answer any of your questions. Shukran. Thank you very much. Virginia, are you going to do the question bit, or do I? Oh, no, I can answer them, don't worry. That's okay, if they can hear us, yeah.
You gave such a good speech that you've answered everything. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask the Minister about the economy, about future directions, about... Yes. Yes, there's
a mic there.
Hi, Nicolas from Electricity Brokers. Just wondering, how are you planning on funding the network asset upgrade, 68 billion? Have you got a plan in place for that?
For which, I'm sorry?
The funding of the upgrade to infrastructure for the electricity assets in New South Wales.
Yeah, definitely. So we've put in place provisions under the new arrangements to make sure that that capital injection into the infrastructure businesses continues. And what is interesting is, and the question has reminded me of a fact I'd like to share. In about 5 weeks' time, I'll be delivering the state budget on the 21st of June. And that state budget roughly talks about the $70-odd billion governments receive and spend every year. But our state's balance sheet is worth about $300 billion. I think it's the largest or second largest balance sheet in the country. And our net worth as a state is about $200 billion. And we have enormous cash reserves to support us in making the necessary capital injections to support all of our state-owned corporations. But in relation to the businesses which will be subject to a long-term lease, in the contract there are provisions to ensure that infrastructure investment continues. So that is definitely part of our vision for those assets into the future. And remember, for 2 of those 3 assets, we will still have nearly half those businesses. So as a shareholder and having a retained interest, it will be in our interest to make sure those businesses are successful. Thank you.
Treasurer, hi.
Where's the question? Thank you.
Hi, Treasurer. Shane Gahar from AG. A question for you. How important are surpluses in a state budget, and would you maintain surpluses at all costs?
I think surpluses in a budget are extremely important because they demonstrate your capacity to live within your means, and they're also a demonstration of confidence in a state's financial management. And what we believe is the best indicator of good financial management in a state is not just the budget position, but also the AAA credit rating. And we are very proud that we are only one of 2 states that has a AAA credit rating. And I believe it's so important to ensure that the AAA credit rating and managing surpluses are continued. And in relation to the AAA credit rating, I say this: Victoria and New South Wales are the only 2 states that have that rating. But the difference between New South Wales and Victoria is in New South Wales, we have the AAA credit rating even though we are spending billions and billions and billions in infrastructure. So Victoria has that credit rating, but they don't have the pipeline of spending that we have. So for us to be in a position where in the general government sector, we essentially have 0 debt at the moment. So our net debt is virtually 0 in the government sector. We have surpluses forecast in the last budget. I can't tell you what's happening in the next budget. You'll find out in 5 weeks' time. And we have a AAA credit rating. And as a government, we obviously aspire to maintain those opportunities. And I think the key thing is not only delivering confidence, but also ensuring that the foundation is there for everyone in the community, whether it's retailers, whether it's business people, have the confidence to keep the economy growing. So for those reasons, good management can be demonstrated by obviously the AAA credit rating, but also delivering surpluses.
Treasurer Joe Risk from the Arab Bank. First up, thank you very much for your presentation today. There's an enormous amount of passion out in the West in regards to the infrastructure, but one of the biggest spends is going to be the new airport at Badgerys Creek. Just in your opinion, do you see Badgerys Creek becoming the major airport over a period of, say, 20, 25 years? Because I think it's dramatically needed out there.
No, thanks for the question, Joe. I believe the Badgerys Creek Airport is a phenomenal opportunity, not just for Western Sydney, but for New South Wales. I think it will be a huge economic driver for jobs and infrastructure and growth. And in fact, our state government is already committed to, actually we've already started building the road network to support that airport. And it's interesting to see month on month when we get the figures for jobs growth, Western Sydney is really doing so well. We're seeing double-digit jobs growth in Western Sydney. We haven't seen that for a long, long time. And that is not just 1 month, it's a trend. And we know the opportunity is for us to further grow the economy there. And Badgerys Creek Airport will be a wonderful facilitator of that. And what I love about that, it's a medium and long-term prospect. It's not just the short term. We've got enough to keep things going in the short term. But because of our spend on infrastructure, whether it's the West Connects or upgrading the rail network or the roads and hospitals and schools, but to also have that infrastructure plan for the airport will give that boost that will maintain the economic growth into the long term. And I think the potential of that facility is limitless in terms of the future.
Good afternoon, Minister. David Crease, Bardia Perry Solicitors. Minister, you talked about jobs and the employment that the government's helped to foster. And of course, businesses going ahead. One of the big imposts on business is payroll tax. It's also a brake on employment. So my question is, what does the New South Wales government propose to do about payroll tax? As in, does it intend to phase it out or reduce it? And if not, why not?
Good question. For those of you who may not have heard, the question was, what is the government's intent with payroll tax? Do we intend to phase it out? And if not, why not? It's a pretty pointed question. And my response is, as the Treasurer of New South Wales, I would love not to have to collect payroll tax, stamp duty or land tax. They're all taxes on incentive, right? One's an incentive potentially, you could argue, on jobs, one's an incentive on purchasing property, and one's an incentive on having investments. So as a state government, we appreciate the community feeling about those issues, but that's why Premier Baird and myself will continue to argue that we would like to see tax reform at a macro level between all the states and the federal government. And obviously we'll have these discussions after the federal election. But if there is appetite for reform, we believe we can then have an opportunity to reform the way that we look at our own tax base. In the absence of a macro level reform, it's very difficult for us to change the levers without knowing what the bigger picture will look like. But we are up for looking at opportunities which actually incentivise business and incentivise the community to do what it does best. And we appreciate those imposts, and that's why we introduced the Jobs Action Plan, which was an incentive for business to hire people, and you get a rebate back on your payroll tax. So we know many of you in this room would have applied for those grants. And we look forward to further opportunities as well. But we certainly hear the frustration in your question and appreciate how some businesses regard it as an impost to hiring more staff, and we're trying to reduce those barriers by providing those rebates, those opportunities of relief from payroll tax when you hire somebody. And of course, we're also up for broader discussions in the medium to long term about how we can improve the way in which our federal and state tax systems work. Thank you. Oh, Anwar. Sorry, Anwar, I didn't see you.
I haven't got a classical question for you. Can I ask you a question that it is on everyone's mind? Is Gladys the treasurer of the New South Wales government, or is she the treasurer of the New South Wales government? That's number one. Number two.
Thank you.
Believe me, she deserves it. Secondly, can the Turnbull government take advantage of the success of the Bird government in the next election?
No, thank you. We'd like to think that because our economy is doing so well, that we're supporting the economic objectives of the federal government. And it's interestingly, the last time figures were updated on the national accounts and the national economy grew by $40 billion on the previous count, $39 billion of that came from New South Wales. So not only is our contribution to the national economy driven by jobs growth and infrastructure spend, but also purely by our net contribution to the national economy. So I'd like to think that because New South Wales is doing well, that we're supporting the federal government by providing those strong levers for the federal government. So, Anwar, I think I better keep my comments to that. Thank you.
Minister, yes. Ilya Melnikov, Luxcon Property Group. Look, thank you for coming to speak. My question is in relation to you mentioning government wants to invest a significant amount of funds into infrastructure and transport corridors and items like that. At the same time, New South Wales Planning Department in the last probably 3 to 4 months rejected close to $5 billion worth of investment in the West and East Sydney in particular from groups many of which are present in this room. My question is there a plan to be closer collaboration between Ministry of Treasury with the Ministry of Planning to ensure that the funds you invest are going to be paid back by developers in this room in a timely manner? Because, you know, obviously there comes a time when it'll be too late to invest into those particular areas after the funds are invested from your ministry. So.
No, thank you for the question. And believe me that as a state government, we are working very hard to reduce the barriers to facilitate those opportunities. And I have to say the Planning Department is also undergoing major reform. You may have heard of the Greater Sydney Commission. So we put in place the Greater Sydney Commission to especially deal with the challenges you speak of, because before there was a sense of frustration as to how long it took to look at approvals, to get things done, and the plans were very ad hoc. So now the Greater Sydney Commission, which is a body we've established headed by Lucy Turnbull, is responsible for giving government advice on how we can better manage growth and development in key areas. And they are breaking down the silos and the red tape. And as you appreciate, we've also made some difficult decisions around local government reform and council amalgamations, and that is partly also to reduce red tape and to help facilitate decision making. So there's a number of things we've done as a government to address the point you raise, and I'm very positive that in the future, given the business confidence and business investment levels are so high, that you will see that increase even further by those reforms, because I believe in 2 or 3 years' time you'll see the impact of that decision making really making a difference on the ground. So thank you for the question. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. There was one last question. Oh, sorry, there were two last questions. Yes, sorry. I should take back that round of applause. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Mark Fitzpatrick from the Top Place Property Group.
Can you just speak up a little bit, please? Yeah.
Sorry, Mark Fitzpatrick from the Top Place Property Group. You were talking just a moment ago about sort of high-level Department of Planning and something you're going to put in place to minimise roadblocks to development opportunities. But I think most of the developers in this room would understand that the greatest roadblock is at local government level. We've got all the amalgamations happening, and we are all concerned that this is going to add, not subtract, from the roadblocks that we're all finding. What plans does the government have in place to ensure that the amalgamations deliver greater certainty, greater efficiency and greater speed in the development approval process?
I think you'll find the government's reform and amalgamating some local councils will actually see a reduction in the red tape you currently experience, because whereas before there were specific boundaries around a group of suburbs, those boundaries have obviously expanded in some areas, and so the administrator will be able to take a much more broader regional view of decision making. And I think you will find that the arrangements we've put in place, the interim arrangements we've put in place, will actually enhance the ability of local communities to see those changes that they need. So I'm actually very positive about the arrangements we have in place. I'm very positive about the role those administrators will play in ensuring smoother and streamlined processes, but also, most importantly, consistency. And when you have 150 different local governments, you don't always have consistency. And so we believe very strongly as a government that consistency is extremely important, and this process will allow that to occur. Final last question. Where was it? No. Oh, sorry. I thought it was you. That's it. Okay.
One more.
Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. My name is James Wakeham. My question is around the number of units that are being built in New South Wales, in Sydney in particular, and more particular in the West. We read in the papers about potential glut happening in the unit construction market, and I think that it's probably very wise on the government to play a proactive role in not allowing that to happen. And one of the ways that I think could be possible is to consider some freeing up of the stamp duty on unit purchases if you see that this is going to happen, and it may happen, because the consequences of not being proactive in preventing this from happening could be much greater for the government, particularly given that you said that we have about $200 billion in surplus every year.
I didn't put a figure on surpluses, don't worry. I can't say anything before the budget, so...
Yeah. But, I'd like your comment in as far as what's the government doing to play a proactive role in this area, please?
Thank you for the question. And the interesting challenge government has is that the biggest issue, I believe, facing the next generation of people living in our state is housing affordability. And the reason why housing affordability is such a challenge, and part of it is because there was many years of pent-up demand. So for a long period of time, there wasn't enough supply. So we knew when we came to government that if we wanted to address the issue of housing affordability, we had to address the issue of supply. So those same papers that say there'll be a glut in unit price in units coming onto the market will the next day say we have a housing affordability crisis. So as a government, we believe it's responsible on our part to make sure there's sufficient supply in the marketplace for housing, and we're still not doing enough construction that meets demand. Now, in a few years' time, that will change because of record approvals. Once those units come on the market, there will be more supply, which will put downward pressure on housing. But we believe we're moving at the rate we need to move, because for too many years there was an undersupply in New South Wales. And I want to make sure the next generation of young people can work hard and afford to get in to the market. My first home was a unit. Most people in this room probably saved up and bought a unit for the first, and that's why it's important for us to make sure there's enough supply to address that housing affordability issue. And I don't believe there's too much at the moment. I believe we're still working to meet demand because we dealt with a whole, too long of undersupply. And the record housing approvals are a good sign, but remember, you've got to convert those approvals to construction. And we're in the process of doing that, but it hasn't happened yet. So I think we're working hard enough and strongly enough in the right way, and I would still like to see that supply issue addressed. So thank you for the question.
And thank you, Minister, for answering those questions so openly and frankly.